Welcome, everyone. This is our presentation on the Data Helix at the University at Buffalo. I'm Brian O'Connor, Assistant Vice President for Data Analytics at the University. This is a position I've held for, I feel like a child saying it this way, 23.5 months, so I'm still in half months. Early in November will be 2 years. I previously served for about 20 years doing other data-related processes and roles in the university, Associate Dean of Analytics and Planning at a large school, and worked in some departments before that. So I've had a good full range of experiences in the data needs of departments, schools, and then the more central needs as well.
Okay, good morning. My name's Lee Melvin. I'm the Vice Provost for Enrollment Management for the university. I've been at UB for 5 years now. I report to the Executive Vice President and Provost at our institution. I oversee our undergraduate enrollment operations and also our graduate and professional school operations at the institution. So I've been in the business over 25 years. That means 25 plus years for those that go over, and on the executive level for over 10 years now. And so we look forward to talking about the Data Helix and how we came up with that hook line to bring you into our session, but then also what we've been working on at our institution, especially at the last 3-4 years, I would say. So we're going to take it from there. So Brian, I'll let you go ahead and get started with it.
One thing I want to say first is this is not meant to be a highly technical presentation. It's more about the process we did, building a collaboration between analytics and enrollment management, resource planning, and others on campus, so we could have a common view of reality. We're not quite there yet, and so we will see a lot of Tableau dashboards at the end here. This isn't really so much how we did those, but what we've put in place at this point so that people can actually make better decisions, hopefully. So a little bit about what we're going to cover today, and hopefully, and I would say after watching a lot of presentations, especially the higher ed ones, this will resonate with others in higher ed. It's a similar story. We all seem to take a slightly different path to get there. So first, we'll tell you a little bit about the University of Buffalo, and then a little bit about data services in higher education, institutional research, and kind of expanding some of what institutional research is trying to do, challenges and solutions, and this is absolutely a constant evolution for us. We had an early version that we've solved some of them, and obviously new things keep popping up after there, so we're constantly evolving. And then the Data Helix at UB, a story of collaboration, which, as Lee said, this is the hook that got us to the conference and got you here, which is great. And Lee will explain that to you. And then we'll start to get into some of the tools and talk more about actionable intelligence, cultural shift via Tableau. This is something we talk a lot about on our campus, is not just putting information in front of people, but putting actionable information in front of people. So we don't just report numbers to them. We combine data in a lot of ways. We twist and turn the data different ways so that we can give them something that they can see and act on. And we also try to give them drilling capabilities as much as possible so they can keep drilling in until they can see the action they need to take. And then we're going to show you a number of tools we've built, and the way we decided to do this is we are going to show them within a key campus process that involves a lot of people, a lot of different data, and how these tools are used by different people all the way through the hierarchy in the campus to make decisions. And then after that, we'll give you a few takeaways and bottom lines.
Okay, so first a little bit about our institution. So on the next slide, you'll see it always looks this way in Buffalo, just so you know. It's beautiful out there.
The snow is not real.
Yeah. This is the picture we show students, and then we show them this huge ocean that we don't have. But this gives you an idea of what's happening on our campus. And so with our institution, we have over 30,000 students worldwide. And so we have a plan right now called the UB 2020 plan. And we're one of the flagship schools in the SUNY system. And our 2020 plan for our students that are domestic students, we're trying to get to about 30,000 students. So that was the vision and the mission that was sent to us in the enrollment area. And so we've been working hard to get there. I think we're about 492 students away based on the last 491. See, that's the data guy will correct me. But we're getting close, and we believe that there's a path to get to 30,000. Well, that goal was set by our president of the institution. And so when the president sets the goal, you say, yes, we're going to go and make that happen. On our campus, as you can see with our employees and faculty, and then our contribution to the Western New York region is huge. We have a big footprint in that area. And great faculty and staff on our campus, and we bring in about a little over 4,100 freshmen each year, and about 1,700 plus transfer students. And then our graduate programs are going to bring in about 3,300 students each year. So with our plan to try to get there, we had to start planning on our end of how do we get people informed about what's happening on the campus. Can they see this path along with us as far as the path to get to 30,000? And what work will we be doing with them when it came to presenting documents in front of them so they can make decisions, as Brian has said.
I just want to add, this slide is about 3 months old. We should have put our 7-1 football team on here that we're very proud of right now as well. So, but we did happen to go to the NCAA tournament and went into the second round last year. So, okay, so a little bit about expanding data services in higher education. So all campuses have an IR office. And the key function here is they maintain the data at times, they do official reporting, assessment, surveys, this kind of work. This is required of every campus, iPads and other type of things like that. It's historically served a ranked set of users in the organizational hierarchy. President, provost, it goes down, and if there's time, then you can start to answer some questions for more and more people, but there's only so much time, and in many cases, really small staff. A couple of other conferences that I've been to in the last few years that are more higher ed conferences, I've talked to people who are a single person IR office. It's amazing how common that is in smaller schools. So 80% of the places in the United States have less than 5 FTE staff, according to this survey from AIR. So what this causes is a lot of non-central silos being set up. And I've talked to a number of people here on this at TC about this, not only in higher education, but everywhere else. So as I said, most of what you're going to hear here, I think applies outside of higher education. But you'll get non-central silos, often developed to create school-level data solutions. So we do have an operational data store that all of our information is pushed out to the campus, and you obviously have to get appropriate access to that. But once you have access, you can start building some of these things, which sounds great, except for when you have a lot of people building a lot of different solutions without a full understanding of the data. Or trying to build a solution based on one piece of data and not a whole series of connected data. So this is a data maturity model that most of you have probably seen in various forms before. So IR is primarily dealing with descriptive historically, that they're telling what has happened, they're reporting to iPads, these are a lot of counts and things like this, historical counts. What my team is doing, along with others on campus, is trying to move up this chain more towards why things happened, and then what will likely happen next. I'll show you some predictive tools later that we have put in place that look out 4 years in the future for heads and the revenue that will be generated by those heads, so that people can start to plan early and change outcomes, hopefully. And eventually getting to prescriptive. What actions will change outcomes? And again, we'll show you some more of this later. So the challenge in IR is, can you move past these descriptive reporting requirements to predictive or prescriptive analysis? So in 2016, the Association of Institutional Research, the national body for institutional research, with funding from Bill and Melinda Gates, created this statement of aspirational practice for institutional research. And this was really about expanding IR to do more analytics type things, even stronger decision support, not just the standard reporting. Part of what they talked about is a more federated model also. So you can push out to people in the units to help out with this, and that can work if you get the right people out in the units helping, and it gives you a little bit more capacity to move past reporting to analytics. UB took a little different path on this. So this is how our institutional research office was configured prior to 2016. So there were two groups essentially. One that mostly did internal reporting, effectiveness surveys. Another group that dealt with data infrastructure and official reporting. So in 2016, this group, the group that I now head up, was created with the work of Craig Abbey, who's in the audience here, our institutional research director, and Lee and others on campus. And this was driven actually from the provost down. This is something that came out of another effort that Lee will talk about in a little bit. So that was added in November of 2016. We don't do official reporting. We use the official data to do other things, but my team's job is really to try to move up that hierarchy that we showed, from descriptive to predictive. And that team actually, both of my team members were able to join us today at this conference. Michael Stratford is one, and Michael Estouni is the other. So we are a team of 3 doing this on campus right now, with help from other colleagues in the institutional research office and others on campus. But we're primarily a 3-person team. So challenges and solutions. There are 3 primary challenges that we have been talking about, and again, these are across all industries, not just higher ed. One is drowning in data, starving for information. I first saw this phrase probably 15 years ago, and I thought it was so spot on that I put it in almost every presentation I've done since then. We're getting incredible growth of data, right? All of us. Not only from our student systems and our financial systems, but from phones and swipe cards and you name it. We have a lot of data available to us. So it's really a matter of turning that into useful information, actionable intelligence, as we talked about before. Another challenge is to switch silo thinking into more shared thinking. This is what the first part of this presentation, before we get to the tools, this is what we're going to be talking a lot about, is what did we put in place to try to get this to happen? And it is absolutely a process. This doesn't happen that you say, the provost said we're going to create this group, we're going to now have analytics, everyone use them. That doesn't work, as most of you know who are in higher ed. And this is a big part of that, and Lee will talk to this more in a little bit. So creating trust and partnerships throughout UB's hierarchy. This means from the president and provost to deans to their senior staff to departments, everyone has to sort of have a buy-in on this, right? Otherwise we go back to this silo situation that we were trying to get away from. We've actually seen changes already. Several units in our campus have hired what used to be data people that are now power users of our tools that can use them to explain to their leadership what actions need to be taken. Everyone on campus doesn't have to be building this or trying to build the same numbers, because what we would have is in meetings, there would be disagreements on their numbers and our numbers, right? Interestingly, I was on the other side of that in my previous job. Craig, you shouldn't smile so heavy on that. So I was the one with bringing in the other set of numbers that we would argue about. But now I came to, someone called it the dark side. I don't think it was you, Craig, but so we don't have those arguments as much. So we're trying to retune how departments and units are using their former data people, right? To be users of the data, not creators of the data.
So as we heard our speaker talk about this morning about bring me solutions. Well, I use that line a lot, just so you know, and I enjoy it. But I only use it after I think we've really exhausted the argument and the debate is there. And so it's time to bring solutions. So one of the outcomes of our group, as we talked about not comparing, but being collaborative with our colleagues, is we had a group on campus called the Enrollment Resource and Planning Group. And so we were bringing enrollment and the resource planning piece together. And because when we got there, enrollment was over here and resource planning was on this side, and the two only met at certain meetings. And when we'd had conversations with our deans regarding their enrollment, I heard from a lot of our deans. They would say, well, I don't care about headcount, and I said, I don't care about revenue. And so I said, okay, I could believe that. And I said, but if your headcount was 0, you care about it, right? They said, yes, that's okay. So let's talk about headcount. But this group was able to get together a lot of business officers from around the campus, a lot of the resource folks, along with our institutional analysis team, working on different committees to start to pull together what is needed on the campus, what information was needed to help us understand our headcount, our credit hours, and how that produced tuition revenue. So that was one of the outcomes from our group when we collaborated here. The second outcome was that, as Brian said, we were able to hire an institution analyst for the university. And no one wants to hear, oh, I need to expand my staff. That's always a concern from folks, but we said we need to expand the staff, but we were willing to also give up some staff members to bring in this campus analytics team. And so that helped us out quite a lot as we were going through the process here. So those are some of the parts when we talked about some of the solutions from our end there.
So the other thing, after looking at lots of different options, we actually made a commitment a number of years ago to Tableau as our visualization platform. And there was slow buy-in to that as well. Like many of you, initially there was some pushback, especially with some of the costs involved for people if we were going to expand it. But once we put some proof of concepts in place, it was a little easier to sell people on this. And since then, right now, I would say we don't have a lot of people complaining that we chose Tableau. And I hope you'll see that in some of the visualizations we've been able to build. And then communicating this vision and building community trust. when the vision starts with the provost, it's a little easier to communicate this to people rather than a few of us saying this is something we think we should do. You should agree with us. So there's a lot of different layers of this. We go out into dean's meetings. We go one-on-one with dean's offices and their senior people. I have individuals coming to my office routinely that we can talk through some of these tools. All the development of these tools came from talking to the users as well. Some of this was based on what I had developed with my team previously in the College of Arts and Sciences, and then we tried to scale it. But everything we do keeps adjusting as we meet with the units, and that's a regular process for us.
Okay, well, speaking of the vision side, this is where I get to have a lot of fun. And so my part in this was to bring a vision to the institution of how we use data on our campus and how I see data and how I work with data and how we work on reports. But also part of my job is to have a vision for enrollment for the university. And in my vision, one part is about aligning our resources so that we could be much more efficient. Also, we can be much more flexible and nimble as we go through this process. And then another part of that was when you look at the list there, it talks about data and how we would use data to make our decisions on campus. But then we have to figure out how do we get that data to folks. And so in my vision, and this is where we have to use your imagination as well as far as how you approach things and how you see things. And so for me, it is about how data comes at me. And usually in slow motion when I'm talking to folks and they're telling me what they want and what they need as far as the tools to help them make decisions. And this is when I started thinking about what the Helix structure. And I also use this structure in what I call the Enrollment Helix, which has helped us when we talk about our enrollment at the university from the first point of contact and progressing through that process all the way till they graduate from our institution. And so when I was thinking about our data, and I call it the data helix, really looking at that structure that might be there. So some of the things that we looked at, if you think of that data as part of that, that's the strand. And with the data and those side chambers there is where information comes in. And what the Helix does, is, those of you that are really big into science, just I'm not a scientist, I'm married to a scientist, but I am not one, so I pretend to be one at home when we're having conversations. But when we talk about the Helix and how it's supposed to progress, and how information should move through the university. And those side chambers are some of the different areas that are there. So, and then how do we communicate that data to the rest of the institution? So taking that data that's in that strand, those side chambers being several different areas, when something comes through, just as when something's attacked in your body, it starts communicating. You have to build these, blood vessels to protect yourself. And so it's how we're going to protect our institution as well. But thinking through, what can we see there? And the reason I use this, many of you that are enrollment management use the funnel. And so we all know about the enrollment funnel. And the enrollment funnels, it's this large, we say structure, you pour a bunch of names in there, and then it goes through the process, and then you get your class usually. And people say, how'd you do that? And that's what they ask. But with the funnel, for me, the limitation was that you couldn't see behind it. You couldn't see what was actually happening in the funnel. And then as I started thinking about how data works to our institution and enrollment works, I want to be able to see. I want transparency there, and I want the rest of the campus to come along with me as we take that journey to bring our class in, to retain our students, and to produce our scholars from the university. So, but what structure did I need to help me get there? So I sat down with my colleague over here, Brian, and explained to him, this is how I see it. And I said, but I can't take this to the campus. And I'm sure the deans would eat me up because, especially the ones that are super, super smart, they would know all about it. So then what we started looking at is what would be a model for us so I can still visualize this, get the data, get the transparency, see a seamless process, and how do we get that information out to everyone? These are the units we know we're going to work with. This is just some of the units, it's not all of them. But then as you think about this collaboration, pulling everything together, like those side chambers there, you think about what you need in faculty research, along with registration, demographics, wherever data comes in to this Helix, we're able to communicate it back to our general group so we can have this structure that we can pull data from and share with the rest of the campus. And so as we think about our mission here, our educational mission, we all know why we're there. Those are in higher education. We're bringing our students in. We want to retain them. We want them to persist through the process. from that persistence, move on to graduation, and we hope they had a great experience and become happy alums of the institution. But in the end, all of us want our students to succeed on our campus. And so as I was working through this idea and the vision of how I wanted to see this, then Brian and his team, they started taking it and then producing and working on their tools. And so, because that's their part now. They get it, they work on the tools, they produce them, and then we started sharing with the campus so everyone could see what we were doing. And we were building that trust with the campus. We were reducing those data wars, in case you haven't had any of those in your meetings, where you sit down and say, well, here's my data. And then they say, well, I have a data set too. And Brian's been in some of those meetings with me. And my response is, okay, but today we're only using my data. So you get to use yours next time when you call the meeting. But now we're not having those. We thought we were going to have one with this one group, right? One team.
Right.
And that was the meeting. We were expecting fireworks, but it was kind of like a rained out day for us. But things worked out because people got used to what we were putting out there. They could see the data. We were showing them transparency, building that trust, also responding to what they thought they needed. And then my colleagues in institutional analysis, my colleagues in resource planning, we all got together and said, we need to get this information organized, and we need to make sure that we understand what they think they're seeing, and then can we paint a clearer picture for them. So this is how we got to the data helix. It really was just as I think about how data should flow through a system.
I think a big part of this also is we talked about most of the real insight comes from combining data, not looking at how many students you had or whatever. Mm-hmm. So everything we'll show you has combined data in it. There is no single source view that we're going to show you in any of our tools. We can give you those, and actually I have a phone app to show you in a little bit that has those readily available. So when these data wars happen in the future, you can pull out your phone and slide it across the table and say, this is the number we're talking about today. That's my vision of this. So actionable intelligence, cultural shift via Tableau. So we use Tableau as primarily a visualization tool. We do a lot of our ETL and analytics work outside of it and use it to do most of the visualization work because we want it to be quick, and we're playing with using it to do more than that, but that's primarily what we're using it for. So like many of you, we have a lot of disparate sources of data, right? And these are all single source that at some point, someone's job is to look at majors. Someone's job is to look at money. Someone's job is to look at retention. But in the end, we're trying to get it where everyone can see the combined picture to do their job and understand what's happening with the other people who are trying to do their job. The relationships, especially with heads and money. We have a newer understanding on the campus now than we've ever had before, that every head that comes in generates a certain revenue. So it's not a matter of just hitting your head count if they're the wrong type of heads. You'll see that in one of the tools later. So we do a lot of transformation of the data. We have a central team. Our IT group does a lot of the heavy lifting on this and puts things out in our data store, operational data store. But then my team has the ability on the fly to make other changes. And so we're constantly doing this on a whiteboard, talking through an idea, and then we go twist and turn the data and build a viz to see if it's going to be useful. We use it a lot for experimenting that way. Once we have the data transformed, we can create lots of different visualizations, right? This is the process that we all go through. And we had visualizations before Tableau. We were doing plenty of this for 20 plus years before that, not just my group, but others on campus. But there's something that Tableau gave us that I'll show you in a minute that was the real power of Tableau. So from these visualizations, the idea is that decision-making will evolve on our campus from sometimes the loudest voice and their idea being what drives the decision to really strong data to drive the decision. So we tried to move from story-driven to data-informed. And I was in many meetings over the years where the strongest story was winning out because there was no data to counter it. Again, I hope the phone can slide across when that gets stated in the future and we can give them some other data. And it's all about being able to take action. If we show people data and all they've done is seen a number now and they can't do anything with it, that was a waste of everyone's time. So we need to have data in front of them in an information form that allows them to take actions. And then the what-if modeling is something we've done a lot of in the last 2 years. And we've done it with retention, we've done it with admissions, we've done it with tuition revenue projections, we've done it with a lot of things. So the idea is to move from knowing what, it's what I talked about before with that hierarchy, knowing what to understanding why to effective planning for what next. So here's where Tableau really helped us. So as I said, we had lots of visuals that we could put in front of people, but that was often sending a PDF to someone or emailing someone with a finding, but there wasn't really a rich way to distribute these things. You're all somewhere in the process of having either never used Tableau to having a really rich Tableau Server environment. And I want to show you 3 quick steps of what we did in between there. So this is a simplified version of our Tableau distribution history. I believe that I was the first person on campus to get a trial version because the campus address was my office when Tableau reached out to us shortly after that. I actually had 5 trial versions. Is anyone from Tableau in here? They probably don't want to know this. My 10-year-old son had a version under his email, and I actually was on a golf course once, and a call came in from Seattle, and I thought I might want to take this. It's probably my brother. It was Tableau saying, Breck, who's my son, how's the Tableau thing working out for you? And I said, Breck's not available right now, and I hung up the phone. But so we kept going with trial versions. It gave us enough time to start to build this out. And before I asked my dean for the money to invest in this, I wanted to make sure we could show them something. So we would take screenshots and send them around to our folks. We would email PDFs. We had less than 5 users early on this whole process. And the one thing that one of my colleagues mentioned not too long ago, we would also pull something up on the screen and say, you know what, can you go get so-and-so and bring them in here and look over our shoulder. Look at the stuff we can build now, right? So that was our start. The distribution was not strong. Then we moved to having some desktop licenses, and we started creating packaged workbooks and PDF outputs for people, stored these in a secure area on our server, and then got everyone to get Tableau Reader, which was great until the new version came out, and we had to make sure everyone was on the next version and the next version. So this was still better than what we had before, but there were less than 40 users in a single school. Today we're on Tableau Server. We have scheduled extracts, much easier distribution to the campus, web accessibility. Like I said, on my phone, we have 3 of the tools that I'll pull up on my phone momentarily. And we can also do user tracking and usage. So we see what tools are being used and what are not being used. And sometimes we catch someone in there while we're making some beta changes, and I have to contact them and say, don't use that yet. You weren't supposed to see that quite yet. We have a number of really trusted beta users on campus that we can push things out to also in the units that will help give us a lot of feedback. So this was our distribution history, and Tableau Server has opened this up incredibly. I will say one challenge we have is on the security side, and we're still trying to work that out. We're using AD groups. We're doing a lot of different things. We're a 3-person team. I really don't want to be in user management, so we're going to try to automate that as much as we can and use some of our IT resources to help us with that. So information integration in a key campus process. We decided instead of just showing you a bunch of tools, we would try to put them in context as part of an annual process that many of you, whether you're in higher ed or others, probably understand. So this is our annual resource planning process that we go through on our campus. So week 0 is the beginning of a new academic year. Week 52 is the end of that year, right? Week minus 52 is 1 year prior when we start to do the planning process. And that planning process has multiple phases. There's an information collection phase. There's a discussion and decision phase, confirmation and implementation phase. So we go through that and we start at week 0 with a plan, right? We'll show you what that process used to be and what it is now. We've made dramatic changes in that process in the last year, and it's going to continue to change going forward. Then once that's in place, we have 52 weeks. We have 4 terms that basically we can make adjustments if we have enough information to make those adjustments. That's a key part of this. So historically, people would plan. We'd start at week 0 and say, this is what we think is going to happen. And then as the time would go on, they'd say, what happened? What happened? What happened? What happened? Are we there? Now we know ahead of time where they're heading. And you'll see in some of the tools that I show you points that the curves change dramatically because someone took an action early on that changed their outcomes. So this is the process that we're going to embed things in. So there's lots of people involved in this process, as Leo will talk about.
Right, and so with this process, I meet with our deans and their teams, and we work on reaching consensus on their enrollment targets. And so I'll go out and say, well, I think you need, your headcount should be around here, and this is the type of students that we think you're going to need, and this is why. And then the deans would come back and say, well, what will that do with our tuition revenue? In the past, we couldn't tell them any of this information. But this is our hierarchy here on the campus. All of us go through this process. Every department goes through it. If you're doing what they call an investment request from the institution and you want funding for your ideas, and especially for any academic initiatives that the academic units are producing. But with our administration, you start here with our president and provost. Of course, that's the senior administration and the VPs on that level. Those arrows are just how we were communicating with each other. And then as you see over here, like you had enrollment management, our headcount target there as we were working, with the different schools, especially with our deans. Then you had resource planning over here on the other side, where resource planning would work with the schools. And my colleague who was over resource planning at the time would come to me and say, why are people coming to me asking about headcount? And she goes, I don't want to do headcount. That's not me. I said, well, you have numbers over here. And I thought she did headcount but that was my job, but I was going to let her do it. It was fine. But I said, but you have these numbers over here, and people want to use that information. And so, but these numbers don't equal to what we think their revenue might be for the campus. So we fixed all that and with our parts there, but also keeping the communication going between our leadership, our departments, but also other different users in their unit, because that was the important part as well, is they're advising their leadership, just like I advise my leadership, that we want them to have the same information. So we had to make sure that the parts that we were doing, that we brought them closer and kept everyone informed. So we have another structure on our communication plan and how we communicate with each other, through our leadership, to our deans, to each other, and then who serves in that role and what information should come from each individual in that environment.
And one key thing is those people in the headcount side of the business can see the revenue side of the business, and those in the revenue side can see the headcount. We had units that actually had those two people not talk to each other during the year. And one would say at the end of the year, we don't have enough revenue, and the other one would say we had the heads. So that can no longer happen, because as soon as heads start coming in, we're putting value on those heads and showing what the tuition revenue is going to be right from the beginning. So if you're in the headcount business, you can see what the impact is on revenue, and if you're on the revenue side, you can see if the heads are going to be delivered to do that. So having people have both views of both sides has been very helpful.
And then, of course, as we talked about the roles that people have on campus, and it was respecting those roles. And as Brian has said, when people bring feedback to our areas, we wanted to use that feedback where we could to improve what was being sent out to our units. But these are the folks that we brought around the table. As you can see, it's those from campuses where you have in higher ed, there's a big group of people that are making your campus work. And so we had to bring those folks around the table. We had to talk about facilities. We had to talk about courses. We had to talk about their faculty that they're hiring. We had to talk about everything that would impact their enrollment, and then of course reaching out to their revenue side. So this helped us once we started centralizing several of our areas, especially centralizing the enrollment side, but centralizing it in a way where the units still have their own autonomy, especially on the graduate side. As many of you know, they're going to continue to have their autonomy, but it was finding ways to centralize them and using the data side to bring that together.
So as we talked about before, different roles will require different levels of information. So we're designing tools so that the president and provost can have a quick tool that they can look at. One of the first tools we built for Lee was a 5-year graduate enrollment tool that you can see every school over the last 5 years, every week, 1 year prior coming into the fall. How are people doing now versus how they've done in the last few years? So we're building that level, and then we have the ability to drill really deep into the data. If you're on the front line, you can see what's going on at a student level or a course level. So depending on who was looking at this, different people throughout the hierarchy who had to communicate with each other need different levels of information. So that's the who. Now the what. We have a lot of information. This is similar to what I showed earlier with the disparate data sources, right? These are the kind of things that are part of this annual resource process. And again, different levels for different people. So now we're going to start to get into a little bit of the communication and a little bit of the tools.
So when I arrived on campus, this was our ARPP process, the annual resource planning process. The schools and colleges will send me a lot of information and say, this is what we're going to do, and this is why, and this is the number of students that we need. And then our offices would pull them together, and we would say, okay, we're going to use this information, we'll try to get it back to you. And things were getting dropped and lost in several parts there. But that was our annual process for a while. Everything was just coming one direction, information. And then by the time we got close to like their budget time, we would get more information out to them.
And then as Lee said, the resource planning group, the enrollment management group, and institutional analytics were separate. These different groups would get the data from different people within a unit even, and then try to make sense of it.
And then the process was updated, and as we started digging in and pulling it apart and saying, how can we improve this? And to update that process, we had to start thinking different ways. So I would go out and meet with them and say, here's what we have right now on you. Here's what we think where you're going to land based on your applications, based on your admits. If this, looking at historical trend data, et cetera, this is what we think will occur. Now, write back to us and let us know if you think we're on target. If not, then we'll find a way to get to that target. That may require a few more meetings, but it was more than just my office sending out information, because we were now collaborating in the center with resource planning and also institutional analysis. So the data that I was putting out there, when they would come back about headcount, they would talk to my office. When they needed revenue, they would talk to the resource and planning office. And then also with our institutional analysis, they would think about, especially their reporting and the data that they have available to those units. So we're able to move the communication process out to the different units first, as opposed to everything just coming to us. And then that helped, because then they could see where I was at the time with what I thought we should be doing and what I'm going to be recommending. And my recommendation really did come from where they said their tuition revenue should land. And so that's where we would get into a very nice debate on, is this number going to get us to our tuition revenue? And we said, well, based on what we're projecting here, it should get you there.
So this year we changed the process. Instead of units sending the data to central offices, our team put out a tool that I'm going to show you momentarily, and some of the support tools for that allowed us to put in front of the deans and their senior folks what we projected for the next 3 years. Because this process, having been in a unit that did this process was done by 12 different units, 12 different ways, with 12 different levels of sophistication, including some people in smaller units who this was 2 days of their year that someone said, we need the projection. So they do the best they could to get this information out. So this year, we built a tool that pushes the projections out to them so that everyone has a common view of this. So if they want to talk to Lee, they're talking about the same numbers as Lee sees. If they want to talk to resource planning, they're talking about the exact same numbers that resource planning is seeing.
And this is where we are now. As you can see, information moving back and forth to every unit. And as Brian has said, this will help us understand where we're starting and where we think we should end. And so our process, we believe it's improved tremendously. I mean, so I'm having meetings now but we're seeing year 2019, 2020, 2021. So we're not starting from scratch every year. We do have a 3-year planning process, but now we start and we say, well, this is where you said you wanted to be in 2019. Are we on path to get there? And send me more information about what you think is going to happen with your applicant pool this year. And then for some, that was tricky, because we had to start working with what prospects do you have? And this is particularly on the graduate side. On the undergraduate side, it's pretty clear. We get our targets, we know where we might come in and the distribution, for those different units. But now that we have this process, it really is more seamless and more transparent on this is what I'm seeing. This is information I have. Let me know if I'm missing something here. And then when you go to meetings, much more productive meetings. And you have better outcomes from those meetings. We're not sitting there trying to argue over 2, 3, 4 students. We really are looking at it as a cohort group. And also, like as Brian said, it's not just about the exact number at that time. It's about what our dashboards, when we pull this together, is that this is the dashboard information that's available to you, available to me. Let's see where it's going to take us as a team.
And we now have people looking at the dashboards and calling and saying, I dug into the dashboard and I found this thing. Can you tell me, does this make sense? Are we reading this correctly? If we take this action, will it make sense? And so we have those conversations routinely. So it's really been a powerful shift. Okay, so onto the tools. So our annual resource planning process, what's available and where do I find it? That's the first thing, right? There's all kinds of information out there, but how do you get access to it? So let's start with where do I find it? We built this tool before I presented to the deans and vice presidents on our campus to show what we've done in our first year. And rather than go through Tableau's navigation to show them, we built this tool that is completely based on what I learned last year in a great presentation in Las Vegas called the Dashboard of Dashboards. So we have a dashboard of dashboards that people go to. They log into this. This is just a Tableau dashboard with images and URLs built into them. They log into this, so now they've taken care of their logon. Anything that they have access to here, if they click it, will take them directly to that tool. We also have a little more control of what the screen is going to look like when we do it this way. So we're trying to make it so it optimizes the experience for the individuals. So Lee and I collaborate a lot, and for the most part we agree on things. We kind of disagreed with one slide I wanted to put in the presentation, but then he agreed that I could actually show the phone version of Dash of Dashes. So that's a compromise. We're willing to do that. So as long as this switches over. And when I showed this to Lee the other day, my wife called me at the same time that I was showing this to him. So I don't know if she'll be showing up on the phone today or not, but.
And the only reason we knew it was his wife, because it has Linda, my wife, and that's how I knew it was his wife. So I did mention that to her. I said, I don't know why he has you listed that way, but that's very interesting.
So this is what, as of last Friday, was called Pocketable Insight. And so on your phone, we have these links to 3 of our key tools. And these are some of the tools we're about to show you. A student flow tool called the Wedge, an admissions metric flow tool for our graduate admissions. And the middle one is called How Many? Clever name, huh? You can pull from about 20 different metrics, and it'll show you 10 years of that metric for a school, a department, whatever you need to have that number for. So instead of being in a meeting and someone saying, we'll get back to you with those numbers, you can pull it out and say that number for that. When someone says our faculty have been shrinking for 5 years, you can pull it up and say, well, actually, they've been growing for 5 years. So it's a quick way to get at this information. I'm actually going to try to quickly open one and hope that the technology works. That's my wife, by the way, and my kids. So the idea is to maximize these screens. And so this is a tool that we have that allows you to look at every week, or a blank screen, every week of application flow for the last 5 years into the fall term. You can look at applications, you can pick the metric, look at applications, look at offers, look at registrations, so you understand the flow of these metrics over time. These are very predictable metrics for us. I'll show you that in a minute on one of our other tools. It also has the ability to pull that slider back and forth to see at any given week in the last 5 years, where were you and where were you headed, basically. So this is just to show off our new toy. Very few people on campus have seen anything about this. Special just for you. Okay, so first of all, you have to be able to get to things. So now I'm going to pull up the tool that we built to get information out to our units this year. So this is what we built for the annual resource planning process. And it has a lot of components, and I'll go through them briefly. And then I'm going to talk about tools we have that can tell you why these things are happening and what actions you might be able to take to adjust them. So instead of having an undergraduate headcount person in a school tell Lee what their headcount was going to be, and a graduate headcount person tell what the graduate headcount was going to be, and a finance person tell what the finance was going to be, it's all in one place here now. So what this tool has is undergraduate on the left, graduate and professional on the right, heads on the top, money on the bottom. So you can quickly, in this one dashboard, get to all of this for 6 years of historical data and 3-year projections based on those data. What I usually tell people is don't look at the later 2 years, because all we did in this case is what people have been doing before, is said if what's happening right now happens for the next 2 years, this is what will happen. We have more sophisticated tools now that can tell us what's going to happen a few years out better. So this was the base tool that we built for the campus. And I saw deans in there looking at it. We routinely check who's in there. I see deans in there. I see their senior staff. I get lots of calls based on this. The important thing is this is not static either. This is actually updated routinely based on what we see in other data sets. And that's what we'll talk about now and some of the tools that helped us with that.
So we have all this information, and it was like, okay, what are we going to do with it? And so one of the things is we started using the previous dashboard in meetings with our deans. So as I talked about that transparency piece and bringing the campus along with you when you're talking about enrollment, because enrollment can't be done just in your Office of Admissions. So we use these dashboards so they could see there is a path to get you to your numbers where you want to be. There is also a path with the revenue. So depending on who's sitting in the room, some people start with the revenue, and then they add it up and say, oh, I'm only going to get another $100,000 if we bring in these number of students. We said yes. But we also showed them, but look where the money's coming from, and also let's look out to the future. And this has helped us when it's brought the campus along, where folks will say, yes, I think we're going to succeed and reach our goal, try to get to our 30,000 students overall. that's been set with us, and this is how we're contributing. Because that was the big part for each of our academic units is how will you contribute to help us reach that 30,000 students. So now they can see not just the numbers for headcount, but also with their revenue numbers and which level of students are bringing in that certain type of revenue.
So now I'm going to show you some of the tools that sort of lead to what's feeding this and what changes you can make. So first of all, let's talk about undergraduate headcount. So someone's job in every unit is to understand that headcount, make decisions based on those headcounts. So we need to give them something that allows them to understand what that number will be. So we have a student flow tool that we built a number of years ago called the Wedge. The reason it's called the Wedge is because you start with a group of students, and over time they wedge out of wherever they are, and then also wedge into other places. So this is the most basic version of this, which says the group that came in, so there were 178 students in this particular group. At admissions, that's who they were. By first term, second term, third term, all the way through their 13th term, what was their status? So the status here is either you're still at the university, or red means you left without a degree, which is a group we do not want to be filling. And then green is graduation. So you can see within different cohorts coming in over multiple years and different schools, different subgroups, how do they go through the system? So this level is useful initially because if we see someone who's big red, we want to take advantage or take action on that. But then the system also allows you to see where did they go. So by second term, third term, fourth term, fifth term, where were they? Right? That's important for you to know. And we actually used data from the Wedge to recently start a new program in one of our schools because we saw a lot of people from another school who were leaving that school at a high rate, leaving the campus, but also coming in at a high rate into this other school that wasn't fully understood. So they now have created a major that will draw those students in there. So instead of being red, they will be in another school with a major that should serve their needs. It was specifically crafted for that group of students. So this is one thing we want to know. We want to know student flow from when they start. We also want to know, so in fourth term, whoever this is, where were they before that? Who is your feeder? What schools feed you your students? I've been in multiple meetings where people said, we know that engineering feeds us our students, and we pulled this up and it was 1% of their students. But they said it firmly, so, and they held to it for years. And we've also, this is twice in the last few months we've had this happen that a unit really thought they were getting their students from somewhere that they weren't. So we also have data built into the background of this that when students come into your area, what else happened to them previously? What courses did they take at what time in their career with what grades and this kind of thing. So we're trying to build more of that functionality into this as well. Yeah. So once we understand how their students flow, we can see a group of students and determine how many of them will be going to one school, another school, another school, and that's how we feed each school their potential students, because that's pretty repetitive over the years. For heads at the graduate level, those come in based on admissions, right? So we have a set of tools that allow units to see their applications, their completed applications, and their offers for the last 5 years every week. So we take we refresh this every Monday morning so that they can make comparisons year over year to how many weeks out from the beginning of the fall. So this is not a date-to-date comparison. This is a minus 1 week from the start of fall, minus 2 weeks, minus 3 weeks, because when that fall start date shifts, and every once in a while it flips by a week, right? We have exact same data prior to the start of the term. So what you see here, if you look at the top, those applications, they used to flatline starting at week minus 30. But this was a unit that wasn't getting enough applications, so what they did is they changed their process so that you see at week minus 20, they're still in growth mode over the last 2 years. So they took an action to, because they knew they were going to flatline, if they started low, they knew they weren't going to have enough applications. So they took an early action to increase those applications. They also offered like crazy because we knew some things about the population they were going after and the yield likelihood of that population. So they increased their offer rate and got more applications and ended up delivering a record class this last year, actually.
And the way we use this with our deans and throughout the campus is when I send out my enrollment updates, I no longer send the general update, please admit more students, because that used to be the update. And folks will say, well, what does that really mean? And so now what I send out individualized enrollment updates to each of the academic units. And I'm able to tell that dean, here's where you are with your applications. You have 4 weeks left to try to impact this area. If you can't impact applications, now you must take a closer look at your admit group. And you must look by location, which of those students you should be drilling in on so that you can still come out with your numbers that you're expecting for the institution. So we've been able to use this tool effectively and throughout the entire campus. And also I use it when I go work with the provost. When we do our update meetings, I use the same charts that everyone else is going to see. So that way he's not surprised by data that someone else will bring into a meeting, because he'll say, I thought people were using these charts now. Yeah, and so now that makes everyone else want to use the same charts, because they know when they go in with their data that I've had my update, they have the update. Everyone's copied on the email by their academic unit, and that's helped us tremendously.
And just as an example, we talked before about diving deeper into the data. So knowing your applications is one thing, but if the mix of your population changes, then you may want to know what's happening within those mixes, right? So if there's shifts suddenly in, we'll get to that one. This is actually something that allows us to, before we get to that, this allows you to take multiple years of data and normalize them to final values so that you can lay them on top of one another and see, is this a pattern that looks repeatable, and can you start to use it for some level of prediction? So at some point, if you're always 80% finished at a certain point in time, then you can suggest this is where you might end up and you may need to take action. So this is a very simple version of what gives them a final value early on in the process. This is the diving deeper. This is into what we call location groups. So we have students who graduated from our university, who are a 1-hour commute to our university, elsewhere in our state, elsewhere in the country, elsewhere in the world. These populations act very differently. So if suddenly you increase in one population that you don't have a high yield on, you know you're going to have to offer more to counter that, right? So we can give them advanced information about, based on this, of where they're likely to end up with. And in our institution, because we are a state institution, we have an in-state and out-of-state tuition rate. If you're going to domestic, out-of-state, or international, they pay twice the tuition roughly at the graduate level. So the value, revenue-wise, of those students is different too. So you have to understand whoever you're bringing in has different tuition potential.
Right, and we're also able to use this to see if strategies, for enrollment strategies, were working appropriately. Our deans would ask, are we receiving more applications from our own students? Well, it would take us a long time to try to pull that data, but now we have this data readily available for them so they can see which ones are UB students, which ones are in the state, and they could see what their chances are of getting that student if they admit them. So that's helped us tremendously. Saved me a lot of manual work, things I used to do, or just things that you know, but only you know. But now everyone else can see the data that's there, and then they can make their own decisions on how they want to move to make sure that their outcomes are what they're expecting.
So those are the two headcount pieces, but the real information comes from understanding heads and revenue relationships. And again, for the longest time on the campus, these were two separate sides of the campus doing their thing. In the units it was like that, and on the campus it was like that. And then people would try to pull it together to make some sense in the middle. So we have a tool that's called, Lee once said, I was in the HCR tool, and I said, what is that? Because we talk about heads to creds to revenue. That's one of our things that we talk about with all of our units, that all heads have a certain credit taking pattern and a certain revenue that comes from those patterns. And the more they know about those patterns, the more likely they are to be able to take action. So just to show you a zoom in of this, the head person would be interested in the left side. The money person would be interested in the right side. And you see that these don't have the same pattern, right? Because one change that you see is green is percent out of state. We talked earlier that that's 2 times the tuition, right? So as you have a higher percentage of out-of-state students, you're going to have more value per head. That's actually shown in the tuition revenue per student. So we now have it to the point where when a student comes in, knowing their normal course-taking patterns, we can predict what revenue they will generate for the unit throughout their career, assuming that they flow like they've normally flowed and their course-taking pattern is the same. Lee actually just had a situation this morning talking to one of the schools whose revenue has dropped this past term, and what it was is they made a change in their curriculum that wasn't well understood by people. Now that we know that happened, we can put that in and help them predict that. So that was not really a problem, as it turned out. That's good question, thank you. So this is drilling in a little deeper again. So if you just say, how many graduate students do I have? If you have a lot of doctoral students who are in their 5th year, they're taking 1 credit at our institution and they are not generating much revenue at all. So you can have 1,000 of them and it doesn't generate much revenue. That's the same as 100 or as 80 brand new students, right? So this early, mid, late, you start to see the credit taking loads change, and this is masters, and the value of those students change. So if you had a lot of late master's students right here, you're generating about $2,700 per student instead of $7,000 per student. So it allows them to see a lot of these relationships based on the time in career and based on multiple metrics. So bottom line, all heads are not equal. And in the past, people had a headcount target. They still do through Lee, but now these headcount targets are being discussed a little differently because we're actually now building it. We have access to Lee's targets centrally that we can build into these tools so that as it projects where they're going to be, it'll say, here's where you are versus next year's target. And will you need to do something different to change that? Will you be below target, basically? Okay.
Yeah, because I know our time might be getting short, but just some of the summary tools that we're going to go through, and then hold on for that one because Brian and his team, they've gone deeper into the data so we can keep our units informed about what's going to happen there. But these summary tools have helped us tremendously in our meetings. It's changed the conversation in the meetings. Folks are no longer just going on their story. They have to really produce, all of us, to win that argument, you have to show the data that's out there. So I'm going to let Brian take it from there so we can move through these.
And we talk a lot, I've talked in this presentation, we talk a lot, Adam said we have to say something 10 to 20 times, I think. I'm behind on that. Impact metrics. We talk all the time to people about impact metrics. It's not so much what is your head count, but what's your percent out of state? What is your credit? Are you changing your curriculum where there's going to be different courses taken than there were before? We've had a number of light bulbs go off in meetings when people saw the credits their students were taking. We also only charge up to 12 credits, and then everything above there is uncharged. We had units who had their students taking 17 and 18 credits because they thought that's great for them, right? But that's all cost and no revenue. So we're also starting to build the cost side into this for people. But what I want to show you here is something we built and have been working in sort of beta form with a lot of our schools. It's an imagine and test system. It's a what if. So what dials can you turn in your unit to change things? And if you turned them, would they make the changes you thought they would make? So there's two components to this right now. This is the headcount component. And what it does, those are 5 years of real data and 4 years of projected data. And these are populations of freshmen in their first year, freshmen in their second year, third year, fourth year, and transfers. Since we know through the wedge how people flow through the system, we can use that to predict how many freshmen you have in their first year should become a certain amount of freshmen in their second year, third year, fourth year. So we can push that out into the future years. So this allows you to change 8 different parameters using Tableau's beautiful capabilities. So they can slide these parameters and say, what if we increased our wedge in by 5%? What if we found a group that was feeding us that we could get 5% more? What would happen to our head count? So they can use this to manage their head count. Once they do that, then there's a tuition revenue what if. So at the top of that, does this work? There's supposed to be a red dot. At the top of this is the head count that they just set in the other part of the tool. Here they can have 7 other parameters that they can change. What percentage of that student's money do they get when they come in? Early on, as freshmen, students are taking their courses in the College of Arts and Sciences. So the money that you generate off of your freshmen in their first year is very low. Can you change that a little bit in second year, in third year, and fourth year? And if you look at some of the patterns here, these are 5-year patterns, and then the one you want to set. There's repeatable patterns here that you can use to try to predict this. But you can also take actions to try to change some of these impact metrics. Just to show you this is a constant evolution, as of about 3 weeks ago, this is the new version of this. So heads and revenue are now in one place. So you can change both heads and revenue simultaneously without having to switch between dashes. These are all the different impact metrics that we currently have available for people. It also allows you now to go 4 years out setting these. So the other model said, if I set this for next year and it goes that way for 4 years, what will happen? Now you can say, if I set it up 5%, 10%, 15, 20 over the next 4 years, what would happen over 4 years? And you can see your net revenue on the bottom here, academic year revenue, and then as we talked about, against your target. So people can get really good advanced information by turning the dials. So that's the end of the show and tell on the tools. So a couple of quick bottom lines. First of all, yes, there's a lot of disparate data available, higher volumes being generated every day in every area. To us, that's a beautiful thing, because the more things we can pull into our models, the better information we're going to be able to give to the units.
And we were able to also remove frontline staff from just pulling their own data. So really pulling the tools together for them, building that trust with our units, working with them closely so they can see the data how they want to see it. So that way you don't have a lot of people going in doing their own data analysis of our data that we needed to share with everyone. Along with our tools, you initiate actions, that will lead to change. And that's what we wanted to do, was show them the information, so especially from our graduate program, so they can take action and make the change they need. And we've seen several of our units do this. And as Brian was showing with the graphs there, the S-curves, and how things have been changing based on data that they could see now, as opposed to waiting to the end and say, oh, I didn't know this was going to occur. Now they can see that it's going to occur in that process.
And these common intelligence tools available via the web have changed conversations on campus. It's different when someone comes into a meeting, has already been looking at the dash for 3 days and says, I found some things, let's talk about this. Instead of us putting it up on the screen and saying, let's walk you through what this is and then we can have a discussion. So the discussions can get right into the meat of things because people can get access to this information. And the idea, like we talked about before, is to break down silos. This is not, it shouldn't be us versus them. We're not creating reality. This is what the data are telling. I'm not making these numbers up with my staff. This is what the data are telling us, right? And if someone has a disagreement with that, we have really hearty discussions about data definitions and how we're processing the data so that we can continue to refine the data. So continuous work in progress, and I can tell you for sure, we've only seen the tip of the iceberg. We already have in our, what I call our skunkworks operation, we have hundreds of these tools that we're playing with right now that we're trying to slowly push out to the campus in beta first, and then we can push them out more widely to the campus. So thank you very much.
Thank you.